40 years had passed, yet whenever she looked in the mirror, the reflection never failed to surprise her. Her skin still carried the softness of youth, her hair remained black as midnight, and her features bore the quiet dignity of a woman who had endured, who had lived, who had been broken, and yet had risen again. People often whispered, "She looks years younger than her age." She would smile politely and stay silent, because she knew the truth. Beauty was not simply in the skin, not in the lines of a face or the smoothness of hair. Beauty, she believed, was the strength to stand tall after every fall. Once, she had been a wife living in a large house, surrounded by wealth but starved of affection. Her marriage had not ended because of poverty, nor because of some terrible scandal. It ended with one word, sharp and final: "You are divorced." That word had pierced her like a blade. For days, she had felt crushed, abandoned, and betrayed. Yet she refused to let that word define her. She did not leave her husband's house as a broken woman. She left like an oppressed queen, walking away from a palace, head held high, her dignity intact. She carried only a small bag in her hand, but in her chest she carried a wound as vast as the ocean. She told herself that she would build again, that she would not let anyone else write the ending of her story. She found a modest home in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. Compared to her old house, it was small, simple, and bare. But for her, it was a fortress of peace. The windows overlooked a calm street, and in the evenings, the breeze carried the fragrance of cool air instead of arguments. In that silence, she began to learn something new. Solitude was not always an enemy. Sometimes solitude was the only medicine for a soul that had bled too long. Her neighbors greeted her with polite smiles, but behind her back whispers floated, "She is beautiful for her age. She lives alone." How does she manage? She did not care. She no longer lived for society's approval. She lived for her own strength. She created a schedule, a small notebook for her thoughts, a list of her purchases, and a calendar of her errands. Life became orderly, structured, calm. In that order, she found survival. But life has its own way of weaving twists into the fabric of routine. As the days unfolded, she realized she needed someone to help her with transportation. Driving herself through the chaos of crowded streets felt heavy. On a neighbor's advice, she agreed to hire a driver. It was a small decision, she thought at the time, yet it would change the course of her life forever. That is how Karim entered her story, walking through her gate with a shy smile and words that would linger in her memory. "Consider me like your son, my lady. I will be at your service." And so began a chapter she never expected. A chapter where doubt, silence, and hidden secrets would slowly give birth to something stronger than fate itself. Karim was only in his early 20s, tall with broad shoulders, yet carrying the shy innocence of a boy who had just stepped into manhood. His eyes never lingered too long, his words were few, and his movements carried the awkward grace of someone who feared making mistakes. On that first morning, he stood in front of her door in clean but simple clothes, his smile hesitant yet warm. His very presence seemed to declare that he had no hidden agenda, no arrogance, only respect. She observed him carefully, not as a woman curious about a man, but as someone who had lived long enough to know how dangerous trust could be. In her eyes, he was just a young servant, a child almost, hired to drive her through the crowded streets and carry her bags. Yet there was something about him, something that made her release a breath of relief when he said, "Consider me like your son." That statement created boundaries, and boundaries brought safety. From the very beginning, Karim respected those boundaries. He opened the car door before her hand could even touch the handle, carried groceries without being asked, and drove with such careful precision that even the potholes of the city seemed to smooth themselves out under his wheels. When she coughed, he offered her water. When she looked tired, he slowed his pace. To her, it was merely duty. To him, it was loyalty. But outside their quiet car rides, whispers began to swirl in the neighborhood. Women at the grocery store leaned closer to one another and muttered, "The beautiful widow and her young driver." Some laughed, others shook their heads. She heard it, of course, but she ignored it with the same dignity that had carried her out of her failed marriage. Let people talk. They had always talked, and they would never stop. Her focus was on maintaining order. She wore elegant but simple dresses, her perfumes light and dignified. She carried herself with the kind of grace that made heads turn without trying. And every evening, she wrote in her notebook, pages filled with lists of errands, reflections about her day, and fragments of thoughts she could not share with anyone else. Kareem was only a background figure in those notes, a name mentioned briefly as part of her routine. Days turned into weeks, and weeks shaped themselves into a rhythm. Morning after morning, Kareem arrived on time, bowing his head politely as he greeted her. Together, they navigated the streets, the government offices, the small markets, the doctor's clinics. He was always silent, always careful, and she convinced herself that his silence was proof of his simplicity. In her heart, she labeled him with one word, Nadan, an innocent boy. Yet deep inside, though she would not admit it even to herself, there was comfort in his presence. She began to expect the sight of his shy smile, the sound of his soft voice saying, "Yes, my lady," and the quiet strength with which he carried her burdens. She told herself it was nothing more than habit, nothing more than convenience. But fate had other plans. Because silence, once stretched too long, has a way of breaking, and when it breaks, it reveals truths that cannot be ignored. The mornings had become a gentle rhythm of predictability. She would step into the car, Kareem would greet her with his quiet smile, and the road ahead would stretch like an endless ribbon of order. The sun filtered through the trees, the engine purred softly, and her notebook rested beside her like a loyal companion filled with tasks yet to be done. To her, order was strength, and Kareem was simply a part of that order, a pair of steady hands on the steering wheel, a quiet shadow at her side. But fate always chooses the smallest cracks to break through. That morning, while shifting her position in the back seat, her eyes fell upon something unexpected. Kareem's right hand wasn't empty. He held a small object pressed tightly between his fingers, as though it carried the weight of a dangerous secret. Her heart clenched without warning. Suspicion rose like a storm inside her chest. For a moment, she stared at his hand in silence, her mind racing with questions. Then, before she could control herself, her voice broke the air, sharp, demanding, filled with an authority she hadn't planned to use. "Kareem, what is that in your hand?" The car swerved slightly before he corrected it. His eyes flickered nervously to the mirror, and his lips trembled as if caught in a crime he had not prepared to confess. "Forgive me, my lady," he stammered. "I didn't mean to worry you." His tone only fueled her doubts. The blood rushed to her face, her heart pounding with both fear and anger. "What is it?" "Answer me," she demanded, her voice louder than she intended. Kareem hesitated. He lowered his gaze, gripping the steering wheel tightly, then slowly raised his hand as though torn between obedience and shame. He opened his fingers just slightly, enough for her to see, but not enough for clarity. And then, as if protecting something fragile, he pressed it back to his chest. "My lady," he whispered, "I will tell you the truth. But please forgive me." The car rolled to the side of the road, the engine still humming, but the air between them had shifted. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with shame, confusion, and something deeper, something she could not name. His trembling hand opened fully at last. Her breath caught in her throat. Whatever it was, it struck her with such force that she froze in place. Shock flooded her veins, making her chest rise and fall with painful intensity. She whispered sharply, "Wasi, Kareem, where did you get this?" He lowered his head further, his voice broken. "It wasn't mine. I only carried it for you. I never meant to hide it." The words did not soothe her. If anything, they burned deeper. She pressed her hand against her chest, her mind screaming with questions. Her lips curled into cold words. "You've placed me in a difficult position, Kareem. Don't ever do this again." He turned back to the road, whispering apologies, his voice trembling with sincerity. The car moved forward once more, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. That night, as she sat under the dim lamp with her notebook open, she wrote with a trembling hand, "Today everything changed. I saw something I should not have seen. He told me the truth, but my heart is not at peace. Is it fear, or is there something far more dangerous?" The ink blurred with the weight of her doubt, and though the pages closed, her mind could not. The following days were heavy with silence. She sat in the back seat as always, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing streets, yet her mind was elsewhere. No matter how much she tried to distract herself with her phone, with her notebook, with the endless lists she wrote for order and control, the image of Kareem's hand clutching that mysterious object returned again and again, invading her thoughts like an uninvited guest. Kareem, for his part, seemed more cautious than ever. He drove with greater care, his eyes fixed on the road as if he feared looking into the mirror might expose too much. His voice was softer, almost timid, when he asked about her destinations. He avoided unnecessary words, avoided her eyes, avoided anything that might stir the storm again. And yet, for all his caution, his actions never lost their gentleness. When she left a government office exhausted, she returned to the car to find a cool bottle of water waiting in the seat. When she struggled with heavy shopping bags, his hands reached them before she could lift a finger. When rain surprised her at the doorstep, he appeared with an umbrella, shielding her before a single drop touched her. These were small gestures, simple acts of service, but to her, they became contradictions. If he was guilty, she thought, if he was truly hiding something, why does he care for me like this? Yet the shadow of doubt would not release its grip. She remembered his trembling voice, his repeated apologies, his refusal to explain everything clearly. That hesitation, that silence, it poisoned her heart with suspicion. One evening, she stood by the window watching the rain streak across the glass. Her notebook lay open, the pen heavy in her hand. She wrote slowly, "He is innocent, but why do I still feel unsettled? He told me, yet my heart remains restless. Is he truly a simple boy, or is there a secret he refuses to share?" The words looked strange on the page. She pressed her lips together, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. Why did his face keep returning to her mind? Why did she recall not just the object in his hand, but the wounded expression in his eyes when she accused him? On the third day after the incident, their eyes met suddenly in the car mirror. For a heartbeat, the world paused. In his gaze, she saw something she could not name, a mix of hurt, sincerity, and a silent plea. He lowered his eyes quickly, but the look had already pierced her defenses. She turned her face toward the window, swallowing the tremor in her chest. That night, tossing in her bed, she whispered aloud to the darkness, "Why do I care? Why does his pain feel heavier than my own doubts?" The ceiling offered no answer, only silence. But her heart, restless and stubborn, had already begun to carve its own. Morning came with its usual rhythm, but the air between them had changed. Kareem stood by the car, holding the door open with the same respectful bow of his head, but his smile was gone. His face was pale, his voice low as he greeted her. "Good morning, ma'am." She nodded without replying. He waited for her to settle, then closed the door softly and slipped into his seat. The car moved forward, but the silence inside was louder than the hum of the engine. Every glance in the mirror showed a distance between them, a glass wall neither dared to break. She tried to focus on her errands, her lists, her carefully written plans, but her heart was restless. Every quiet gesture of his, adjusting the seat, checking the mirror, slowing the car when she looked tired, cut deeper into her doubts. If he was guilty, why would he still care so much? The question gnawed at her, and yet another thought whispered cruelly, perhaps care is only a mask for deception. Later that afternoon, she returned home exhausted. As she stepped out of the car, he handed her the groceries with careful precision, making sure nothing was too heavy for her hands. His eyes lifted briefly, searching her face as though waiting for a word, any word, that might soften the air between them. She ignored his gaze, offered a cold thank you, and turned away. His footsteps retreated quietly, his silence like a wound. That evening, she sat in her living room, the lamp casting a faint glow on the notebook before her. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "I cannot understand him. Every action speaks of loyalty, yet my mind refuses to rest. Why so many apologies? Why so much hesitation? Is there truly a secret hidden behind those innocent eyes?" She pressed the pen harder, as though the paper might yield an answer her heart could not. The following day, Kareem surprised her with his quiet care. When she complained of sudden fatigue, he stopped the car near a pharmacy, bought her medicine without being asked, and returned with a gentle voice. "Your health is important, my lady." She looked at him briefly, and in that moment, her chest tightened. His sincerity was unmistakable, but her pride forced her to turn her face away. At night, the rain fell heavily outside, echoing her turmoil. She lay awake, hearing the storm lash against the windows, while inside her heart another storm brewed. She recalled the trembling in his hands, the shame in his eyes, and his repeated promise that it was only a trust, nothing more. Yet even that explanation had become a prison, locking her between trust and suspicion. Finally, she sat up in bed, clutching her pillow, and whispered into the darkness, "Am I wronging him, or is he wronging me?" The words dissolved into silence, but her heart answered with a strange ache, an ache that felt dangerously close to longing. The days passed, yet the silence between them grew heavier with each ride. She thought that ignoring him would ease her doubts, that coldness would shield her from weakness, but instead it only magnified the tension. Every small kindness of his, every careful movement, every quiet glance through the mirror, each became a weight pressing on her heart. That morning, she entered the car with a face hardened by pride. Karim, already seated, greeted her softly. "Good morning, ma'am." His voice was low, hesitant, as though he already expected rejection. She replied in a clipped tone, "It will not be a good morning if we continue like this. We need to make boundaries clear." He looked startled, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "I am at your service." "Say what you wish." She inhaled deeply, steadying her voice, then spoke firmly. "You are my employee. Nothing more. Do your job and don't give people a reason to talk. I don't want whispers about me and my driver. I don't want any behavior that might embarrass me." The words fell like stones in the quiet car. Karim lowered his gaze, his lips pressed tightly together, his silence louder than any protest. After a pause, he whispered, "As you command, ma'am." She turned her face toward the window, hiding the sudden tremor in her chest. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she had protected herself, preserved her dignity. Yet when the car stopped at her house and he handed her the shopping bags without a word, his silence cut deeper than any insult. His shoulders were heavy, his step slow. For the first time, she saw him not as a boy, not as a servant, but as someone wounded by her own cruelty. That night, the scene replayed endlessly in her mind. His quiet "as you command" echoed in her ears, and her heart ached with guilt. She sat before her notebook, pen hovering above the page, but no words came. At last she wrote shakily, "I thought I was protecting myself, but why does it feel like I am punishing him? Why does his silence hurt me more than his words ever could?" The following day, Karim arrived on time as always. His face was paler than usual, his voice faint as he said, "Where shall we go today, ma'am?" She answered curtly, unwilling to reveal the turmoil inside. He drove quietly, only speaking when absolutely necessary, and though she wanted to remain distant, her heart betrayed her. She noticed the way he waited outside in the sun while she shopped, the way he brought her medicine when fatigue struck, the way he shielded her from rain without being asked. Every act of his loyalty whispered against the wall of doubt she had built. And late that evening, standing by her window with the streetlights glowing faintly below, she admitted softly to herself, "His silence wounds me, because I no longer see him as just a driver." Clouds gathered that morning as she stepped into the car, her expression set, her heart restless. Karim greeted her in the same faint tone. "Good morning, ma'am." But she did not reply. For miles, only the hum of the engine and the faint patter of raindrops on the windshield filled the silence. She could no longer endure it. The tension was eating away at her, whispering doubts every time she looked at his steady hands on the wheel. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "Karim, I want to ask you something, and I don't want evasion this time." His shoulders stiffened. He glanced at her quickly in the mirror, then returned his gaze to the road. "I am at your service, my lady." "Ask what you wish." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on him. "That day, when I saw your hand, what were you hiding? I will not live with this doubt any longer." A long silence followed. She felt him holding his breath, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned pale. The seconds dragged like hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost pleading. "I told you that day, ma'am. It was not mine. It was only a trust." Her anger flared. She struck her bag lightly with her hand. "Do not play with words." "What trust? Who gave it to you? Why all this secrecy?" He slowed the car and pulled to the side, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His face turned toward her at last, his eyes filled with confusion, shame, and something deeper, fear. Please, my lady, he whispered. Believe me. It was not meant to harm you. I did not dare to say more because the time was wrong. I was afraid of your anger. She laughed bitterly, though her throat ached with suppressed tears. The time was wrong? Is there ever a right time for a lie? His voice cracked. It was never a lie. It is a trust I carried. If it had been up to me, I would have told you everything. But I feared for you, not for myself. I feared the weight it might place on your heart. Her eyes burned as she stared at him. Karim, I am not a child. I have the right to know the truth. If you cannot tell me, then leave my life. I will not live in this torment. For a moment, silence swallowed them both. Then, in a voice almost broken, he said, Please, just a little more patience. Do not wrong my heart before you hear it. I swear to you, the truth will come. But if you cast me out now, you will never know what it was. She turned her face to the window, hiding the tears brimming in her eyes. Outside, the rain blurred the glass, but inside, her heart blurred between suspicion and a dangerous tenderness she could not admit. That night, she wrote in her notebook, He says it was a trust. He begs for patience. My mind screams doubt, but my heart trembles with belief. Am I protecting myself? Or am I betraying him? The following days unfolded like a slow-burning fire. Outwardly, nothing seemed different. Karim arrived on time, opened the car door with quiet respect, drove carefully through the streets, and carried her bags with unwavering patience. Yet beneath the surface, every gesture was heavy with unspoken tension. She no longer saw him as just a driver. She saw him as a man carrying a secret that had somehow become bound to her own life. Her mind was restless. Each night, she wrote in her notebook, repeating the same tormenting questions. What was this trust? Why give it to him? Why me? The pages filled with doubt, anger, and a strange tenderness she couldn't name. For every harsh thought she wrote, her heart betrayed her with another. Memories of his gentleness, his quiet care, his eyes lowering shyly when they met hers. Finally, one morning, she entered the car with determination carved into her face. Karim noticed immediately. His hands tightened on the steering wheel before she even spoke. She leaned forward, her voice trembling with both anger and need. Karim, the time for patience is over. Either you tell me what was in your hand, or you leave my life today. The car slowed abruptly, pulling to the side. For a long moment, he did not move. She could hear his breathing, heavy and uneven. Then, with trembling hands, he pressed his palms against the wheel as though grounding himself. His voice came out raw, thick with fear. Madame, I beg you to understand. It was not about me. It was about you. Her heart skipped. About me? What do you mean? He raised his eyes at last, meeting hers in the mirror. His gaze was a storm of sincerity and shame. It was a message entrusted to me to deliver to you. Not my words, not my choice. Only a duty I carried. The words struck her like thunder. A message? Who would dare to send her a message through her young driver? Her breath quickened, her voice sharp with demand. Then where is it? Show me now. He hesitated, his eyes clouded with conflict. Slowly, he reached into his inner pocket, but just as she leaned forward eagerly, he pulled his hand back and whispered, Please, my lady. Think carefully before you take it. It may change everything in your life. I was afraid to place such a burden in your hands without your readiness. Her chest tightened with fury and confusion. Do not play with me, Karim. If you respect me, give it to me now. He closed his eyes briefly, then whispered in a voice drenched with sorrow, Soon, I promise. Soon you will know. Just do not cast me out before then. The car moved again, but the silence inside was suffocating. She turned to the window, hiding the storm of tears that blurred her vision. In her notebook that night, she wrote with shaking hands, It is a message. About me. He says it is not his, but mine. Why then does he tremble so much? Is he protecting me? Or protecting himself? The night before, she had not slept. Her body lay restless in bed while her mind replayed every moment, his trembling hands, his whispered apologies, his plea for patience. The word message echoed like a haunting refrain. Who had written it? Why had it been given to Karim of all people? And most of all, why had she allowed herself to live in torment for so long without demanding the truth? By morning, she was no longer willing to wait. She stepped outside to find Karim already by the car, his face drawn, as though he too had not slept. His eyes avoided hers, but she refused to let the moment slip. She stood firm, her voice steady, though her heart hammered violently. Karim, no more silence. Give me what you have. Today, I will not take another step until you do. For a moment, his lips trembled as though he would argue. But then, defeated by her resolve, he reached into his pocket with slow, shaking fingers. When his hand emerged, he held a small folded piece of paper. His eyes lifted to hers, filled with fear and sorrow. This is the trust, my lady. But please know that it is not mine. I never added a single word. I only carried it as it was. Her fingers shook as she took the paper. It was light in her hand, but heavy as a stone in her chest. She unfolded it slowly, each crease like a drumbeat echoing through her veins. When the paper opened fully, her eyes froze on its contents. It was a photograph of a man, handsome, elegant, wearing a white doctor's coat. Next to it, clipped neatly, was a small card with clear writing. This is my number. Give it to her. Her breath caught in her throat. A gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it. Her knees weakened, and she pressed a hand against her chest as though to steady her heart. For days she had tormented herself, accusing Karim of secrets, of betrayal, and now the truth was nothing more than a card from a stranger. She turned her gaze sharply toward Karim, who watched her through the mirror, his eyes wide with apology. I was afraid to give it to you, he said softly. A doctor stopped me outside the clinic. He handed me this and said, give it to her. I didn't know how to explain without offending you. I feared you would misunderstand, that you would think I had overstepped my place. Her face flushed with heat as shame rushed through her veins. Memories flooded her. Every harsh word she had spoken, every cold glance, every sleepless night filled with suspicion. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, Oh God, all this suffering, all this doubt, for a piece of paper. Karim lowered his head, his voice choked. Forgive me, my lady. My silence was not disloyalty, it was fear. Fear of hurting you, fear of disrespect. You are a trust to me, more precious than anything. She could no longer hold back her tears. They spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, And I doubted you. I wronged you, Karim. The truth had set her free, but it had also broken her. For nights she had accused him in her heart. For days she had sharpened her silence into knives that cut him without mercy. And yet he had endured quietly, loyally, without once turning away. Now she saw it all with clarity. Karim was never her enemy. He was her shield, her silent companion, the one who bore her doubts with patience that only love could sustain. As the car rested by the sidewalk that day, her tears flowed uncontrollably. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed to show weakness, but he had already seen. His voice was trembling, gentle as ever. Please don't cry, my lady. I never wanted to cause you pain. I only wanted to serve you faithfully. She looked at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Then, with a voice that broke like a whisper yet carried the strength of truth, she said, Karim, you were never just a servant to me. You were the one who stood by me when everyone else abandoned me. You filled the silence of my house with loyalty, the emptiness of my life with care. And today I know I cannot live without you. His eyes widened, disbelief flickering across his face. Madam, what do you mean? Her tears turned into a fragile smile. I mean, I choose you, Karim. Not as my driver, not as an employee. I choose you as the man who has proven to me that loyalty is more powerful than wealth, that respect is more beautiful than flattery, and that love can bloom in the most unexpected hearts. For the first time, she saw tears glisten in his eyes. He lowered his head, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, before whispering, "But what will people say? You are a lady of dignity, and I am nothing but a poor driver. They will laugh at me. They will laugh at us." She reached forward then, her hand firm as it touched his. "Let them laugh. I have spent my whole life listening to people. It is time I listen to my heart." Silence enveloped the car, but it was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of two souls who had finally spoken what had been hidden. He lifted her hand to his forehead and kissed it gently, his tears falling freely now. "If this pleases you," he whispered, "then I am the happiest man alive." Weeks later, there was no grand celebration, no glittering lights or crowded halls, just a simple gathering, a few witnesses, and quiet prayers as her name was joined to his in marriage. She sat beside him, no longer the lonely woman who once feared the whispers of society. She was reborn, her heart filled with peace, her eyes filled with pride. Looking into the mirror that night, she saw not just her beauty but her strength, and for the first time in years, she whispered to herself with certainty, "I chose love. I chose loyalty, and I did not make a mistake."